Hi, everybody. Welcome to the March 11, 2016 edition of Colorado Inside Out. I'm your host, Dominic Dezzutti. Thank you very much for joining us. Let's get a quick take on a bipartisan proposal at the state legislature that will require students to pass a civics test in order to graduate from high school. The exam would pull content from the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services test given to people who want to become naturalized citizens. Patty Calhoun from Westward, would dropout rates plummet, or would dropout rates raise incredibly if we pass this law?
Well, first we should give it to our legislators, and I would think that we would have several open seats in the legislature if that happened. They would not all pass it. We already are changing standards, and we're going to have a social studies test that the Department of Education is putting on these students next year. It's a really nice idea in theory, but I think really if they pass their courses, they should be able to graduate.
David Copeland from the Independence Institute and DU Law School. What do you think of the proposal? I mean, I imagine some people already assume that students are graduating with some sort of sense of civics, but possibly not.
You would think so, because of course they're required to take American history in high school and typically also in junior high or middle school. But as Patty said, it ought to be in the curriculum anyway. I think this will help realign the American history curriculum and also classes like government, say you might take in 9th grade, with actual civics standards. Clearly the civics knowledge in this country, including in some legislators, is very low. The two leading Democratic candidates for president and the leading Republican, both are running as if the presidency of the United States is an elective dictatorship, where they can just do anything they want by so-called executive orders. That's not our constitutional system. Our new citizens know that. The natural-born ones ought to know that as well.
Ben Gilt, a political strategist and consultant, is it up to schools maybe to kind of update the idea of civics? They need to come out with what would the Supreme Court Snapchat about? What do you think?
Supreme Court Snapchat, that's an interesting thought. I think that the idea is fine. Certainly there is a deficiency in, I think, civic knowledge, and the entire civic debate in our country has gone downhill. So it's a nice idea. I think in implementation it might be a good idea with bad outcomes.
And freelance journalist Lisa Kennedy joins us. If new citizens have to learn this stuff, shouldn't our students?
Yes, I do think they should. And I think one of the things that's interesting is that it would actually create, if not a bond, an awareness of what new citizens are learning. I mean, and sort of creating an interesting way in which to say people who want to be here, who are coming here, have to know this. Shouldn't you? And that sort of to create a bond between those two. I think that would be interesting. I do think that the implementation issue is probably not unreasonable, but I like the idea that they may have to sort of know what other people who are just coming here have to know. And I sort of looked at the test and I did fairly well. And I was like, oh, okay, this is interesting. It's just a way to bone up on stuff, I think.
The city of Denver enforced its homeless camping ban on Tuesday by removing makeshift homes and personal belongings near 22nd and Lawrence in downtown. Denver Human Services spokeswoman Julie Smith stated the conditions in which people were living were a risk to public health. Patty, there are a lot of angles to this. Critics came out about how it was done, what resources are available. Take your pick.
Well, let's go back to just over 10 years ago when the Denver's Road Home was introduced, which was supposed to end homelessness in the city in 10 years, and we see how well that's worked out. The focus with Denver's Road Home, the early focus was smart, which is if you can get people into housing, and especially the people who are have mental illness, have real significant problems, so that you can get them the kind of help they need long-term to keep them off the streets, and then for others who have short-term issues, losing jobs, illnesses that cost them, that had their hospital bills go up so high, give them the temporary help they need to get back on their feet. All those were really laudatory goals, and somehow on Denver's Road Home, we lost the way. Up until 3 years ago, when we suddenly had this anti-camping ban pass, but without the services we would really need to help people not be on the streets, we were supposed to have more shelters. We were supposed to have more places where people who are mentally ill could go for service. And we were supposed to have a day shelter, which finally opened up this fall. But when it opened without a place people could put their stuff. And that's what really led to the problem we have now. If they couldn't park their stuff, they would stay with their stuff. They can't they can't be on the mall. They've been rousted from the bike paths in different places. And there's nowhere for a lot of these people who are mentally ill and are choosing to be on the streets to go. So somehow sweeping them off the streets and taking their stuff or throwing away their stuff doesn't actually seem like it is going to solve the problem ultimately. Out of sight is not going to be out of mind here.
David, does the fact that the city had to send in so many different folks to make it seem like such a major sweep point to a bigger problem?
Well, it points to the number of people who were there, and so how much government action was necessary to deal with it. I would, first of all, defer to Patty's expertise on this issue, but also say that the Denver Post editorial board had a different take, and as they explained it, the mayor had been very careful about this and really dotting every I and crossing every T before acting, including making sure that there was shelter space available for every person who got displaced from this illegal camping area. It's one thing to say, well, if there's no place for them to go, then why just move them from one place to another? On the other hand, if there is some place to go, then the law is clear. You can't be camping and sleeping so as to obstruct public thoroughfares like the 16th Street Mall or other areas.
Ben, should the best city to live in America be doing more about the problem?
Absolutely, we should. And David, there aren't enough places for people to go. And if we just believed everything we read in the newspaper, I've got some property in New York I'd love to talk to you about. We have fundamentally punted on this issue over and over. Patty alluded to the mission of the Denver Road Home, which has failed. This administration has supported the camping ban, which effectively made homelessness illegal in the city. The University of Denver, about a month ago, released a report that studied all the different camping bans and similar policies enacted by municipalities across the state, and found uniformly that the policies were expensive and not productive for the cities. I think that this action certainly may have felt necessary because it is an eyesore, but the reality is that we are trying to sweep this under the rug, and it's just another example of this administration trying to do the right thing but totally failing.
Lisa, where should the city government specifically be on this issue?
Well, I think they're going to have to sort of revisit what the road home was and sort of try to put into place some actual strategies that can address the variety of there's a diversity in the homeless population, and and I think that calling it a community is one of the ways to make it sound like one thing when it is in fact a diversity of people making choices. And I love that Patty mentioned sort of the notion of like people with stuff, right? Stuff is like one of the things that we think all of us have a right to. I mean, we may, we're like backing off on this idea that you can have a right to like a place to live, but there's sort of this sense of like how people feel connected to stuff. I was disappointed in the Post editorial to some degree because I thought it didn't acknowledge some of the things that really needed to be acknowledged about sort of why people make the choices they make, and also it maybe not criminalizing but sort of sweeping away things is to sort of not make real gestures towards what's going on in this city. I mean, if you have a city that's sort of developing the way it is right now with this boom, this looks very suspicious in some ways. So I think it behooves like the mayor and the city to take more steps to figure out how to address transitional housing versus housing for chronically homeless people that are really not the mentally ill, that are really not going to be able to sort of transition back into what we see as like of affordable life in some way. So.
As of March 1st, the city of Aurora gave its police officers permission to shoot at a moving vehicle in life-threatening situations involving officers and members of the public. The new rule states that officers should only use this method as a last resort. The new Aurora policy takes the opposite tack to how Denver police recently addressed the same issue. Now, David, I remember that you supported this issue when it was the Denver police policy that they had eventually reversed. Do I assume correctly that you're in favor of what Aurora has done?
I think Aurora is right, and what Denver has done is ultimately unconstitutional. It's one thing to say, you're at a traffic stop, and then somebody speeds away unexpectedly, and you pursue, don't shoot at that person. That's something that a police department can, within its discretion, say don't do that. But it's a different thing when there is an imminent threat of murder, when somebody in a car is trying to run over a police officer herself or some other innocent person. Aurora allows self-defense and defense of others in that exigent circumstance when there is no other alternative. Denver's policy can never shoot at a moving car. When it's trying to kill you and you've got no means to escape, that is inhumane. It devalues police lives, and I think it's unconstitutional because the Second Amendment, as explicated by the Supreme Court, includes the right of self-defense, which cannot be taken away from any individual, including a police officer. Their lives matter too.
Ben, Denver and Aurora take opposite views on a lot of different issues. This is not the first one. Who's right on this one?
Well, it's an interesting argument. Certainly, if you look at urban municipalities across the country, the tact has generally been to take away this ability to shoot at moving cars. Denver had a highly controversial incident that I think prompted the rule change here, where an unarmed teenager was shot and killed by an officer in an alley in a situation where she may have been trying to evade the police, but there may not have been a dangerous circumstance exactly. You know, it's complicated. Certainly we have to value and protect the lives of our police officers who are there to protect and serve us, but there's a fine line there. And my understanding of the research around this issue is that in most cases firing into a moving vehicle is not productive for the officer or for the person obviously in the car. So my sense is that Denver made the right move here. I think it's unusual to see basically an urban suburb go in this direction when the trend again across the country has been to restrict this sort of action. So I think it's highly unusual, and I suspect that as soon as something happens, it will become controversial.
Lisa, is Aurora protecting its police officers, or is it being tone deaf to recent events?
A little bit of both, which is always aggravating. I think it's that it seems to me that they're being somewhat tone deaf, because if I were in a community, it sounds like they're saying it's okay. And the self-defense thing, it's like absolutely police have the right to defend themselves and their lives. And I think their lives matter extraordinarily. And I think most citizens probably feel this way as well. I certainly hope so. But I think at the same time, you're watching your community make a choice, or your police department sort of back off of something that in fact seems to be the best practice of a lot of police departments across the nation, and even is sort of suggested by police sympathetic organizations, that language, the sort of categorical quality of that language, helps people make a real decision, as opposed to, and it's weird because when you're reading sort of the coverage, there's this way in which the police departments say the language is too categorical, but it's understood that you're not supposed to. And it's just like, you can't sort of have it both ways at this moment, and that's what it seems like. So I think that they're being somewhat tone deaf to the concerns of a number of citizens, and I'm also, and I actually think that police lives matter, yes, absolutely. But like the self-defense issue has been its own sort of very complicated psychological problem in terms of when people actually feel in danger. And that would be my fear.
Patty, Aurora is somewhat of an outlier in this now, since a lot of cities, including Denver, have reversed it. What do you think of their outlier status on this?
I think they'll probably wind up having to pull back as soon as they have an incident that clearly isn't self-defense. I agree with everyone at the table that people want your law enforcement agents to be able to defend themselves, especially from a huge car coming their way. But the problem in Denver stemmed from not just one, but 4 incidents where it was really questionable whether it was a matter of self-defense or whether they were just shooting at a miscreant in a vehicle. And there were several incidents where clearly it was a bad guy behind the wheel, but he wasn't going towards the police officers, he was just driving. And the problem then becomes, if you're shooting at someone and it goes out of control, you've got this huge car that is endangering others too. So I think Denver made the right move. They're just being more cautious when there is a bad guy behind the wheel coming at you, or maybe not coming at you. And Aurora might learn the hard way too, that you've got to be more careful.
The Greeley City Council this week voted 5-2 to overturn a Greeley Planning Commission decision that denied a permit for 22 oil and gas wells near a neighborhood. The now approved plan follows all current zoning laws regulating oil operations near residential areas. However, residents are worried about traffic and air quality. Ben, we have a situation here where we're probably a week away from hearing about probably pretty significant layoffs in the oil and gas industry in Colorado. The 2 major companies that work in Will County and throughout Colorado said that's on the horizon within less than a week. Did Greeley make the right move here? The city council.
Sure. I
specifically.
mean, this is a very contentious issue here in our state. Saw the same thing you saw. Anadarko is projected to lay off 1,000 workers, which is a significant percentage of their workforce. I think that there is a natural and real tension between neighbors and drillers. Personally, if it were near my house, I would be terribly uncomfortable with the notion of drills and wells and those sorts of things going on. So I have a lot of sympathy for the residents. On the other hand, I understand that governing bodies have to follow the law, they have to follow rules, and they're simply saying these are the rules as they exist today, and we are going to follow them. So this is an issue that is not going to go away. There's all sorts of talk about ballot language around these same issues. I suspect that what's happening in Greeley is going to play out in other communities across our state, and I know that there are different forces working to basically create a resolution around this so that it either will happen or it won't. This is a very difficult one, and again, if it were me near my house, I would be opposed to this. So that's generally where I come down. Certainly, we are a big oil and gas state, and we need to have those things going on to support our economy. So it's just going to continue to be extremely contentious. And I think as soon as we can really identify what the actual environmental impacts are, what the actual health impacts are for nearby residents, that's when we can make a real determination about whether this kind of drilling should go on or not.
Lisa, as Ben referenced, the ballot is likely to have a variety of fracking initiatives, whether pro or con. Do you think this situation becomes fuel for the fire on either side?
I'm sorry?
Does this situation in Greeley now become issues in the ballot?
I think it probably does, because it's asking, it's pitting people who, not pitting, but it's like having people talking about property rights on one side and sort of the commons, right, like water and air, and their own property values against people's mineral rights to some degree. That, I mean, at least that's the way it was sort of breaking down at the city council meeting. I thought that was interesting, and I thought that was actually sort of similar to the last time I was here. There was we had this sort of conversation about zoning, and when the city council comes in and they have to uphold the laws, and when people are asking the city council or a city council to intervene in a certain way that goes against what the laws are, and you have to sort of back it up, people, and do the work in the ballot or in the real legislation in a certain way, and sort of having a different and much more difficult conversation about different kinds of property rights and what belongs to the commons and what belongs to a person, an individual. And that's not even sort of going towards the conversation about the actual rights of a corporation. I'm actually more interested in the ways in which this will play out about citizens against citizens, and or citizens trying to figure out each other's positions about what constitutes their sort of rights to clean air, clean water, and their own sort of land.
Patty, Greeley's in the middle of Weld County, which is ground zero for the oil and gas industry in Colorado. So was this overturning of a decision all that surprising?
No, I don't think it was that surprising, especially given Greeley's land rules. But Greeley has really enjoyed, and Weld County have enjoyed the boom. And now as the bust comes, we'll see what happens. Will they be more hospitable to the oil and gas companies that still want to drill just because they want to keep some of that income coming in? Or will we suddenly have a bunch of citizens who really want to fight this and be heard more loudly because you're not getting that much money? The industry isn't as important in Weld County. So we will definitely see this on the ballot in some form or other in November. And I think the conversation will get very, very heated as we go up to that election.
David, did it seem odd to you for a city council to overrule a planning commission? And I wouldn't expect you to have statistics on how often this happens, but did that feel like a rare situation, or does this happen from time to time?
Oh, it happens often enough in all kinds of contexts. Colorado has the strictest laws about fracking in the country, but they're tough regulations, and they're not prohibitions. The companies involved were complying with all the laws and complying with Greeley zoning. So, of course, the city council did the right thing, which they almost had to do, which is to follow the existing law. Of course, people can change the law if they want to, but I think that would be a mistake. It would be selfish, in fact. Part of living in society is you respect the property rights of other people. maybe you're Jewish or Muslim, so you hate pork, but that doesn't mean you can prohibit your next door neighbor, if with proper zoning and following all the regulations, from opening up a meat store that happens to sell sausage. Same thing with these people who have this quasi-religious, anti-scientific opposition to all forms of oil, coal, natural gas. They can have their religious Gaia-ish views of just leave it in the ground, but they don't have any good public health science behind them. The Colorado Department of Public Health and the Environment, the EPA, and on and on and on have repeatedly shown that these Chicken Little scenarios about fracking are all false. It is not a threat to anyone's health when properly regulated.
Let's get a quick take on this last one. Denver Mayor Michael Hancock announced the Next Stage Plan, which is the newly proposed design of the Denver Performing Arts Center. The plan calls for a design and funding study to take place over the next 9 months. Lisa, out of the table, you're one of our theater experts here. So what do you think of the plan and the year they've given to do the financial study?
Well, I think it's sort of vital that they use the year to do the financial study. What I saw, I'm intrigued by, because it opens up that complex just physically to invite more people in. It's not that it's a fortress down there. I mean, I love the Denver Center of Performing Arts, but it is kind of like only active at night when there's events going on. And I think there's such a better opportunity for sort of a public plaza, an inviting kind of space, and also a much more enlivened space in terms of retail. And one of the things I'm most excited about with the Next Stage project, though, is probably, though, I bet I'll have some but then again, moment later on. But for the moment, I'm interested in the fact that they wanted to bring students and high school students down there and bring a performing arts school there. Mm-hmm. They're doing some things that actually the Denver Center Denver Center of Performing Arts backed off of, which was like a producing organization, and this isn't obviously just about the Denver Center of Performing Arts, but it's a major player in that. So I think that it's interesting, and I actually hope that as they're doing the funding, they continue to sort of have their ears open to what people want in terms of inclusion, because that's really part of it. It's like diversity, inclusion, enlivening the downtown area in a real way.
Patty, what do you think of the plan and the year they've given themselves to do the financial study?
Well, it's going to take a year to figure out how to possibly fund this, because we're already trying to come up with the money to finish funding the National Western Center. So in a lot of ways, this is what was originally envisioned for the Denver Performing Arts Complex. You were supposed to have entrances off Spear that would link it to the Auraria campus, which would be the first great start, just because you've got 30,000 students there who could use that as a passageway downtown. The solution for Betcher seems kind of sweet if it works, a smaller auditorium instead of that horrible parking lot, and then more areas for smaller performing arts groups to use. So a lot of it looks lovely on paper, but the question is, how in the world are we going to pay for it? It is not going to be seat taxes at all those venues.
David, what's your quick take on the issue?
I hope people get very involved in participating, because last time we spent millions and millions of taxpayer dollars on this area. Some of it was done very well, and some of it, like the parking garage, was shockingly ineffective, as it turned out. So I hope there's a lot of citizen input that gets it done right.
Ben, wrap it up for us.
Another prime example of a nice idea that I fear will be terribly implemented. Talk about Betcher. The notion of tearing down Betcher is the exact opposite of a sustainable approach. They're also talking about giving away public land to private developers without asking taxpayers, which I think is a huge problem and something that this administration has repeatedly shown a willingness to do, which I, again, find deeply problematic and a violation of the public trust. I think if you look at their history of finance plans, calling them plans or even calling them finance is a stretch and quite generous. These people don't know how to pay for their ideas. And finally, Patty alluded, we should absolutely connect it to the Auraria campus. Spear probably should be buried underground there. But frankly, if you look around at the totality of the projects that this administration has taken on, they have done nothing to add infrastructure or capacity around the projects that they're doing. I would expect nothing different here. So my take is, as usual, a very cynical one when it comes to this administration. But frankly, the proof is in the pudding. They've had 6 years, and they haven't shown any capacity to have visionary leadership.
I just wish you took a position on this, man.
I
You
know,
just
I'm
seem
sorry.
so wishy-washy, milquetoast.
Yeah.
Maybe next time, Let's quickly get through our favorite part of the show, Disgrace of the Week. Patty, start us off.
The ongoing saga of Rocky Allen, the Swedish tech, who it turns out had been fired over and over, and people should have had access to that information.
David.
The 3 members of the State Board of Education who unsuccessfully opposed a good idea, which is for kids in bilingual education, give them an English proficiency test at least once a year. It's supposed to be bilingual, which means you're learning English rather than, as the minority would prefer, kids get stuck in a perpetual Spanish-only ghetto.
Ben.
How about the grown-ups in the remaining Republican Party for not actually splitting off and saying, listen, we're going to just take a political hit here for a few years so that we can have a real party that says and does grown-up things?
Lisa.
I'm a Pollyanna, so I go sort of light. Looking at articles about homelessness online and seeing banner ads for new home communities, starting at $300,000 to $600,000. It's like, I know that it's supposed to be a separation of church and state when it comes to editorial and advertising, but I kind of want to also think that really that shows the disconnect that helps perpetuate why we are fine sweeping homeless people off the street potentially.
Say something nice about somebody very quickly. Patty.
Talk about political parties. The Libertarian Party got its start here in Colorado. It's having its convention this weekend. Want to consider an alternative? Go to that.
It'll get a lot of people thinking of that alternative. David.
Yonatan Azarahab, an Israeli who was stabbed in the neck by a Palestinian terrorist. He pulled the knife out of his neck and killed the terrorist. As the Talmud says, if someone comes to kill you, rise up and kill them first. Happy Purim, dude.
Wow.
Ben.
I was going to acknowledge my stepdad, William Stanfell, who passed away last fall, and we're having a memorial for him this weekend. And he was just a wonderful man. He was deeply supportive of this station, of Colorado Public Radio, of the Corbell School at the University of Denver, and just want to acknowledge him. He was a great guy.
He definitely will be missed. Absolutely agree. Lisa.
I want to give a shout out to Lindsey Jones, former Denver Post writer who is at USA Today and had the temerity to ask Peyton Manning at a press conference a question that needed to be asked about the sexual allegations. I thought he handled it well. I thought she handled it well. I thought people could take a lesson from Peyton about grace and just like allow that she's a journalist. It's okay to ask a question.
That's all the time we had tonight. For everyone here at Channel 12, I'm Dominic Dezzutti. Thanks very much for watching. Good night.